In Seattle, police hope a bloody handprint will finger a killer. But the stain is barely visible. Can investigators bring the evidence into focus? A new computer promises to read a killer's mind. Can it really see the truth locked in the murderer's memory? 2 bodies are found in the California wilds. Clues are spotty and scarce. To bring the killer to light, police rely on a new laser technique. When evidence can't be seen with the naked eye, investigators must use extraordinary means to find it. As technology develops to tease out clues, it's providing detectives with an infallible witness. Forensic science is constantly evolving, from the discovery of the uniqueness of the human fingerprint to the ability to match a criminal to his crime through DNA profiling. Technology continues to provide investigators with new weapons. But fingerprint and DNA evidence are discovered in only 1% of all cases. When trusted techniques fail, investigators must turn to cutting-edge technology to bring invisible clues to light. On the clear spring morning of May 14, 1995, in Kirkland, Washington, just outside Seattle, Randy Acall returned from work and noticed that his neighbor's front door was propped open.
Hello?
Ordinarily, he wouldn't have given it much thought.
Hello?
But he had noticed that the door had been open when he had left for work the night before.
Anybody home?
Randy was a little worried and decided to see if everything was all right.
Hello? Hello?
As he entered the bedroom, a gruesome sight greeted his eyes. He found the body of a woman in her 30s lying in a heap at the foot of the bed. Her head was covered in the top bed sheet, and a t-shirt was bunched up around her neck. Blood stained the carpet beneath her. Horrified, Randy dialed 911.
Yes, I'd like to report an emergency.
Detective T.J. Klump of the Kirkland Police responded to the call.
It was Mother's Day, 1995, at about 10:30 a.m. in the morning. I was preparing to take my wife and daughter out for Mother's Day when, just prior to leaving, I received a call from the Kirkland Dispatch Center, and they requested that I immediately contact Sergeant Markle and the Detective Division that there had been a suspicious death that all the detectives were being called in for to investigate.
When the police reached the apartment, they saw no sign of forced entry. At first glance, there were none of the usual indications that a crime had taken place. The TV, the stereo, and other items of value were still in the condominium. Nothing had been disturbed.
Once I arrived there, and after we had obtained the search warrant, we entered the condominium. And the first thing that struck me was how clean it was for a crime scene. It was very clean, immaculate.
The killer seemed to have been meticulous in covering his tracks. Detectives set about trying to uncover what few clues they could. The case hinged on their ability to bring secrets of the crime scene out into the light. A driver's license was found in a denim purse. The murdered woman was identified as Dawn Faring, a student at the Lutheran Bible Institute who had been living at the condominium for several months. Autopsy evidence, including the body's temperature and its state of rigor mortis, indicated that she had been killed within the last 24 hours. Further test results indicated that the victim had been sexually assaulted, but none of the culprit's DNA was found. The detective and his fellow officers carefully collected evidence from the scene, removing the bed sheets and sections of the blood-stained carpet. They hoped these might contain some clue to the killer's identity. They also found cigarette tobacco and ash near the bed. The victim didn't smoke. They were left by the killer, but were of little use. Another scrap turned up that proved more valuable.
While we were searching the condominium for evidence, we found a box of receipts. And Dawn Faring was a very meticulous person. She was very organized. She saved receipts. She had phone logs. And she had saved some receipts, one of which was a receipt from 5/12 of 95. It was during the late evening hours. She had purchased some groceries at a nearby Fred Meyer's store.
To pinpoint Faring's time of death and to determine whom she might have been with, police went to the grocery store listed on the receipt.
Roxanne, I'm about to show you this picture and see if you recognize this young lady.
A clerk remembered helping the victim. Faring had come in near closing time. She had been friendly and in a good mood, and she had left the store by herself. Along with this information and the evidence gathered from the crime scene, investigators began to piece together the victim's final hours. After leaving the store just before 10 p.m. on May 12th, she apparently went straight home and unpacked her groceries. Putting herself through Bible school, Faring kept track of every penny she spent. She placed her receipt in the box in her hall closet. She then began to bake a pan of brownies, possibly for a Mother's Day celebration the next afternoon. Police estimated it took her an hour to make the brownies. They found them cut and arranged on a plate by the stove. By retracing Faring's steps, investigators arrived at an estimated time of death. Pinning down the time of death narrowed the killer's window of opportunity. But who killed Dawn Faring? Careful scrutiny of the crime scene revealed the faint traces of what might have been finger and palm prints on the bed sheets, traces of the murderer preserved in the victim's own blood. But there was no way to dust or lift the prints from the sheet. Detectives needed to somehow make them clear enough to be useful. The evidence was passed on to King County latent laboratory scientist Pat Warwick.
When we opened up the evidence, we could tell there was some kind of body fluid on the sheet, but any discernible detail, any kind of handprint or anything was very, very difficult.
The print was smeared and faint. No one had ever tried to lift a fingerprint from cloth before, and this one promised to be particularly difficult. Warwick believed his best hope might be to process the prints with amido black, a forensic dye that highlights organic proteins such as blood. But amido black was usually used on hard, non-porous surfaces. Its use on fabric could jeopardize this crucial piece of evidence. Warwick called the FBI for help. but they could offer no advice beyond agreeing that amido black was the best approach. If Warwick used amido black on the sheet fragment, the dye and the rinses in distilled water might well destroy the print. But if the process worked, Warwick would be breaking fresh ground in forensic analysis. Warwick was extremely careful, but it seemed he was not careful enough. When he immersed the fabric in the inky solution, his worst fears were realized. The entire swatch, palm print and all, turned an opaque shade of dark purple. Any hope of getting a legible print seemed lost. In Seattle, authorities investigating the murder of Dawn Faring feared that the only forensic evidence, a palm print, was ruined. Hoping to find another lead, detectives questioned the victim's neighbors. Was this a crime of opportunity? Or was the killer someone Dawn Faring knew and trusted enough to let in her door?
About a year? About a year now, yeah. Yeah, we...
While the work of the detectives moved forward, there was a glimmer of hope in Pat Warwick's laboratory. He was relieved to see the excess dye begin to rinse away from the palm print. As he hoped, the amido black dyed the bloodstains purple. But it also stained the fabric light blue, making it difficult to discern the palm print from the weave of the fabric. The confusion of the two patterns made a clear analysis next to impossible. Warwick contacted his colleague, Eric Berg, an expert in the field of digital imaging and enhancement at the Tacoma Police Department.
Yeah, I don't know how good it's going to be, but just let me know, and we'll get down here.
Could Berg's computers and high-tech cameras read the bloody palm print and identify the killer?
Piece of sheet here. Get some amido black on it.
Up in here?
There might be something there.
Berg used a digital camera to capture the print. It gave him the flexibility he needed to manipulate and clarify the image. Once he obtained the digital images of the bloody print, he followed strict chain of evidence procedures. The images were tracked with a system that protected them from tampering or accidental alteration.
The software that we use uses the data encryption standard, which is a governmental standard that actually will allow you to mathematically prove that an image or any kind of a digital file has not been altered.
To preserve the original picture, he made copies to work from. Now he was ready to clean up the print. But the image was still in such poor condition, he was not confident he could do much. The ridges of the fingerprint seemed hopelessly tangled with the fabric weave.
Now, at this point, I would put in the source. You could just start to follow a ridge line on the print, and then all of a sudden the weave pattern would come in and disrupt your eye, and you'd go off on a tangent, and you couldn't follow that ridge without constantly being interrupted by the fabric pattern. So the biggest problem was that fabric pattern. We had to find a way to just suppress it or get rid of it somehow, and then look at the print, what was left after that. And if I move my box over here...
Berg used software to filter out the background pattern.
You can see,
while it didn't entirely remove the weave pattern, it managed to blur it, allowing the ridge detail to stand out in clearer relief. But it seemed to Berg that while every step made the image of the bloody print a little clearer, it also created new problems for him to solve. In blurring the fabric pattern, this process significantly reduced the contrast of the image. It remained to be seen whether he could make sense of the print. While Eric Berg struggled to render a clear print, the Kirkland detectives continued to question the victim's neighbors.
I was in a hurry. I had to get off.
So you left for work last night about 9 o'clock?
Right, about 9 o'clock.
The names of 5 men living near the victim's condominium complex came up with prior arrest and fingerprint records. One of these men was Eric Hayden, who lived in the apartment above the victims. When Hayden drove into the condominium parking lot, the detectives were waiting to speak with him.
Well, let's wait until he brings.
I looked over at the driver, who was a white male in his late 20s, and I noticed that he was smoking a cigarette, and he was looking over at us with his eyes, but yet his head remained facing straight ahead. I thought this was kind of suspicious.
Hayden strolled past the officers without acknowledging them and disappeared into his condominium.
We waited a few minutes, and we wanted to see if he would return outside, which he did. He walked back down the stairs and again walked past us, not looking over at us, and was walking directly towards his car. It was at that time I approached him and I said, "Excuse me, are you Eric Hayden?" He said, "Yes, I am." And I asked him if I could ask him a few questions about that night, to which he agreed.
Hayden claimed he'd been out drinking on the night of the murder and knew nothing about it. He had noticed nothing unusual when he came home. He puffed on a cigarette as the conversation began. To the detectives, he seemed nervous.
When you went upstairs, did you notice?
But a case of nerves would never be enough for a conviction if Hayden was the killer. The police still needed solid evidence, and pressure remained heavy on Eric Berg to provide it.
4 or 5 times.
In his lab, he fed the image of the bloody palm print through yet another computer program. This step raised the tonal values of the ridge detail, much like adjusting the contrast on a television screen. Finally, using all his software and expertise, he produced an image clear enough for comparison with the prints of any suspects. Police asked Warwick to check the prints of the 5 men with criminal records who lived near the condo complex, and that included the prints of Eric Hayden.
They gave us the name of Eric Hayden, and we checked our file, and we had some prints of his on file in our agency. So we pulled those for comparison. Well, once you're looking at the comparison and you're making the positive opinion of a match, as a late examiner, there's that short period of time when you're the only one who knows. You know, the detectives don't know, no one knows. And then so it gives you a real sense of accomplishment.
On May 31st, Pat Warwick called the detectives and told them he had made a positive match. The prints on the bedsheet did indeed match the prints of Eric Hayden. That same night, the Kirkland detectives went to Hayden's condominium to execute a search warrant.
Police officers, open the door.
Eric Hayden, we have a warrant for your arrest. Lay down, face down on the deck.
Going forward.
Hayden was handcuffed and arrested.
What's going on?
His apartment was searched top to bottom, and his girlfriend was questioned.
Ma'am, I'm Detective Plum.
He was charged with first-degree murder.
The arrest of Eric Hayden.
After Hayden's arrest, police began to piece together a picture of the gruesome events of May 12, 1995. They speculated that Eric Hayden had gained entry to the victim's home, probably through some false pretense. A brutal assault and murder followed shortly thereafter. At some point, Hayden lingered over his victim, enjoying a cigarette. He placed it on the night table and covered the victim with a sheet. He then wiped his bloody hands on the sheet. As he left the scene, one of the victim's slippers jammed in the door, propping it open. It had been the open door that first attracted attention to the crime scene. Though the suspect was in custody and evidence strongly linked him to the crime, Detective Klomp's case was not airtight. Hayden's lawyers asserted that the digital technology was too new to be relied upon at the trial. They argued that the enhanced images might have been altered or tampered with. Any new forensic technology undergoes intense legal and scientific scrutiny.
Hold it right there.
Hundreds of cases have been lost through improper evidence handling procedures. At the heart of the defense team's argument was their view that a virtual image might falsely incriminate a very real and innocent man.
Some amino black on it.
Had Hayden's attorneys been successful in this challenge, losing those prints as evidence would have seriously damaged the prosecution's case. But Eric Berg took extra care to explain the process to the members of the jury and to let them decide for themselves.
We took this into court, we took the equipment with us, we set it up, we took the sheet that we originally received from King County, and we actually captured the image in court, brought it into the computer, performed all of the steps that we had done, and printed out the image, and we were able to show the jury that everything we did there is the same as what we did before, and the result is the same and it's repeatable.
Satisfied that Berg's digital enhancement techniques were sound, credible, repeatable, and damning, the jury needed only 3 hours to return their verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree.
This technology was incredible. It helped us solve the case much faster than we would have been able to having just gone out and contacting people or waiting for additional information to come in. This left no doubt in anyone's mind that this was the killer. It positively identified the killer.
Those prints, which had seemed to be just smudges at first, had finally yielded their secrets to the new digital imaging technology. Ultimately, they betrayed Eric Hayden to justice. Hayden left behind his handprint, thinking it was an illegible smudge. He didn't know that computer enhancement could turn that faint residue into a clear picture of guilt. Other criminals take greater pains to conceal the traces of their crimes, but the remnants of murder aren't so easy to hide. Forensics has ways of flushing them out. On a frigid January morning in 1987, a fur trapper was checking his traps in the blizzard-bound Cactus Flats region of California's Big Bear. It was hard going in such miserable weather. At about 11 that morning, he noticed a large oblong object covered in the new blanket of snow. There in the wilderness lay an abandoned mattress. The strange find seemed innocuous enough, but as the trapper checked around it, he made a macabre discovery. He hurried to the nearest telephone and summoned the police. Homicide Sergeant Gary Stroop of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department responded to the call.
When we got there, it was just starting to snow again, and it's probably about 18 degrees. So we were trying to do the scene as fast as we could so we could get out of there before we got stranded.
Beneath the mattress lay 2 bodies, a man and a woman, both murdered. Stroop found that in one way the weather had worked in his favor. The cold had protected the bodies against decomposition. He was also fortunate to find the bodies intact.
Check down there. See if there's anything.
There's a lot of animal activity up there. There's bears, mountain lions, coyotes, you name it. Had the weather been warmer, we probably would have had animal activity on the bodies.
Footprints, anything?
But who were the victims? Who had taken their lives?
tell you one thing.
The only clues at the scene were the victims and the mattress. The man had some distinctive tattoos that resembled the kind worn by convicts.
I see blood down there.
The detectives tried to identify him by checking prison records.
Homicide, Sergeant Stroop.
Sergeant Stroop's hunch about the tattoos paid off. The fingerprints taken from the man matched those of an ex-convict named Richard Crisson.
Yeah.
The woman was identified as his girlfriend, Shanna Thole.
Yeah, no, just...
Autopsy evidence showed that both victims had died of multiple shotgun blasts. Through prison records, detectives were able to locate and question Richard Crisson's family. Crisson's brother told police that Richard and Shanna had gone to Victorville to see a man by the name of Archie Woods.
Richie and Shanna. Yeah, Officer Barnes, I called you earlier.
According to the brother, Crisson dealt drugs for Woods, who was a motorcycle gang member. This information, along with a background check of Woods, made him the detective's prime suspect. The police paid a visit to Archie Woods. His house lay in a secluded area 20 miles from where the victims were found. Woods wasn't at home. The detectives were greeted by Archie's girlfriend, Sherry Mills. She told the officers she didn't know where he was, but reluctantly agreed to let them in. Even before they entered Archie Woods' home, a possible clue caught their eye. On the front porch, beside the door, they found 2 spots that appeared to be blood. The stains could have been nothing, or they could have been the clue that would break the case wide open. It was too soon to tell. The detectives hoped to find the answer inside. Police investigating the deaths of Richard Crisson and Shanna Thole chased the only lead they had. At the home of drug dealer Archie Woods, they sought any clues they could find.
What time did Richard and Shanna leave? Still awake?
The detectives informed Woods' girlfriend, Sherry Mills, that they were told Shanna and Richard had visited the house.
You had some friends over?
Mills admitted that Crisson and Thole had indeed been there, but only to spend the night on their way somewhere else.
Yeah, so who was it last
She
night?
had no idea of their destination.
Well, it was our friend Rich and,
Inside the house, detectives saw more brown spots that resembled blood. The house smelled of fresh paint. In the back bedroom, they found several paint cans. There was no sign of a mattress. If the murders occurred in this bedroom, police suspected that the paint covered crucial evidence. Police needed a way to see beneath it to look for evidence of a murder. It was the only way they could connect the homicides to this potential crime scene. They ordered a search warrant and then notified the crime scene unit that they had a difficult problem to solve. In the yard, officers noticed several wide, low-profile tire tracks, consistent with those made by a sports car. The woman victim, Shanna Thole, was last seen driving her high-performance sports car. The obvious bloodstains were examined, and the visible evidence was collected. Even so, the police were stymied. If the blood found at the house matched Thole and Crisson's, it could be explained as coming from a fistfight. There was not enough blood in plain sight to prove murder with a shotgun. It seemed as though the entire investigation had literally hit a wall. Forensic expert David Stockwell of the Sheriff's Scientific Investigation Division thought an alternative light source might reveal evidence hidden behind the paint in Woods' house. The alternate light source, or ALS, is a variable intensity laser beam typically used to highlight body fluid evidence on clothing or at a crime scene. Various fluids reflect specific frequencies of light. By adjusting the frequency of the laser, invisible evidence can be seen. Forensic technicians use tinted goggles and reflection-enhancing chemicals to make trace body fluids glow under the laser beam. Here, simulated bloody footprints become too faint to see with the naked eye. But with the right chemicals sprayed on them, and with the laser of the ALS set at the proper frequency, they fluoresce. In theory, at least, blood evidence could be made to glow, even from behind a coat of paint. But it would take the precise combination of chemicals, goggle tints, and laser frequencies to penetrate the painted layer.
The ALS is very good at picking up certain biological fluids, such as semen, but is not typically used to find blood because blood in itself is usually visible to the naked eye. What we were doing with the ALS was to see through that opaque layer of paint to see underneath it and what was there.
But would it work in such an unorthodox application at the home of Archie Woods? Police in San Bernardino had never used an ALS in this manner before. It was not built to illuminate an entire wall. They had to slowly comb small areas, hoping that the light could see through the paint and reveal any evidence beneath.
Okay, Richard, take your goggles off.
Little by little, they succeeded. With the ALS, the grim events at the Woods house were brought to light. There on the wall, beneath the fresh paint, was a wide splash pattern of darkened blood that had been all but invisible to the naked eye. This was the breakthrough police hoped for. They could now read the stain patterns on the wall to determine what happened. As shown here with this colored fluid, blood shed in violence can behave in several ways. It can drip, making a circular spot. Its diameter depends on how far and how much of the blood has fallen. It can form a series of streaks when flung off an object, such as a knife slashing through the air. This is called casting off. But another, equally telling kind of bloodstain appeared on Archie Wood's wall.
The largest of all bloodstains that I've ever seen at crime scenes are produced by what is called arterial spurting. And in this case, what I was seeing underneath the paint on the wall was in fact the bloodstain size consistent with arterial spurting.
The spurting patterns on the wall were consistent with the location of the wounds found on Chrisen and Thole. The ALS painted a grim picture of their violent death. The next problem was how to preserve the bloodstains for use as evidence in court. Without proof positive of arterial spurting, a shrewd defense team might claim that only a fist fight had taken place in that room, not a murder, and certainly not two murders. The ALS had illuminated the evidence bit by bit, but now the laser had to shine on the entire wall in order to take a photograph.
Hey, George, look around. Richard. Why do I call you George?
Investigators used a technique called painting with light.
Okay.
While the camera shutter was held open, the ALS was shown on the wall from left to right and top to bottom until the entire wall had been recorded through the course of several minutes. When the negatives were developed, they provided a clear, admissible picture of what the ALS revealed. That was good news for Sergeant Stroop.
With the pattern that we had on that wall with the use of the laser, it was obvious it was high velocity and a large amount of it, much more so than you'd ever have gotten from somebody with a bloody nose or getting beat up.
The evidence of violent death in that fateful room was mounting. The exposed blood patterns revealed that at the time they were shot, Shanna Thole and Richard Chrisen were lying in the bed, presenting no potential threat to their assailant. Meanwhile, their alleged killer was still at large.
That's what I was saying.
Okay. All right.
In San Bernardino, the search for Archie Woods, suspected of killing Richard Crisson and Shanna Thole, took on new urgency.
So he's making a call right now.
To avoid being implicated in the killings, Wood's girlfriend cooperated with authorities.
No, he left a little bit later.
She disclosed to
he
the
had to go to
detectives
Kmart
that
and get
Archie
some
was in
parts for his car.
Modesto,
He's gonna work.
visiting his little girl on her birthday.
So Richard and Shauna were already gone by the time he...
On Friday, the day Detective Stroop was gathering evidence at Archie's home, Archie himself was already under arrest in a neighboring county for carrying a concealed weapon in his car. He was driving a sports car at the time. Shanna Thole's sports car. From his cell in the San Bernardino jail, Woods maintained his innocence in the double homicide. He claimed that the murders were committed by members of his motorcycle gang. According to Woods, on the night of the murder, gang members asked Woods to lure Richard Crisson to his home. Woods claimed that after Crisson and Thole had arrived, he left his house as the gang instructed. Woods refused to identify the gang members involved.
Archie stuck with his story that he did not know who the other people were that had come into the house, that they were alive when he left and dead when he came back. But he would not ever give up the names of the other individuals that were involved.
Archie Woods said that he had then panicked and dumped the bodies in Big Bear. But with the help of the ALS, the police discovered the crucial piece of trace blood evidence that shot holes in Archie's story. The reclined position of the victims, as indicated by the bloodstains on the wall, just didn't add up to a violent confrontation. Detectives pieced together a likely scenario for the events of that night. Crisson and Thole had come to Archie's home to settle a dispute over a drug deal gone wrong. There was a long night of discussion and argument.
We gotta do something. I mean, he's got a lot of this stuff, right?
Apparently, the disagreement was not resolved to Archie's satisfaction. But he let Crisson and Thole think an accord had been reached. The couple went to bed, unaware of the heavy price that Archie planned to exact from them that night. Police believe that when he thought they were sound asleep, Woods struck his helpless victims, taking their lives with blast after blast from a shotgun. Woods' one true statement was that he had dumped the bodies and the blood-soaked bedding in Big Bear, thinking no one would ever find them. Back at his house, he had first tried to clean the wall, but the blood wouldn't come off. He then covered the evidence with a thick coat of paint. But the alternate light source defied his efforts to conceal his crime. It clearly showed the pattern of the bloodstains through the opaque coat.
You know, when looking at that, there's no doubt in my mind they were killed here. They were in this bed. And, you know, that's going to show everybody, you know, what we know, or help us prove what we know, or convince a jury of what we know. And it did.
Archie Woods was given 2 life sentences for the double murder of Richard Crisson and Shanna Thole. Every criminal leaves evidence behind. The key is to know how to find it. But the most compelling evidence is also the least tangible. It's the criminal's knowledge of his actions. A new technique is testing a way of tapping the suspect's mind to turn a criminal's own memory against him. Larry Farwell is the director and chief scientist of the Human Brain Research Laboratory in Fairfield, Iowa. He has developed a new computerized system known as brain fingerprinting. It reads the memory centers of the human brain. He believes that brain fingerprinting will one day be used to positively link perpetrators to their crimes.
Brain fingerprinting is a scientific method of determining whether certain information is stored in a brain or is not stored in the brain. If an individual has committed a crime, he'll have certain information relevant to that crime stored in his brain. So we can use brain fingerprinting to determine scientifically whether he committed the crime or not.
When someone commits a crime, his brain records it as a memory. Brain fingerprinting seeks to reveal that memory by showing the suspect evidence taken from the crime scene.
Now I'm going to be putting this headband on your head.
A headband with sensors is placed on the subject. A series of pictures or words is flashed on the screen. The computer records the brain waves produced in response to what the subject sees. The responses are recorded as a waveform. By analyzing the pattern of waves, Farwell can determine if the subject is recognizing what he's seeing.
So when you have a situation where a crime is committed, there are certain details about the crime that only the criminal would know, then you can test, does this brain have those details stored in it? If so, then the individual committed the crime. If not, then not.
The FBI is at the forefront of developing and evaluating new technology. After hearing of Farwell's system, they put it to the test. The FBI tested brain fingerprinting on their own agents at the Bureau's training facility at Quantico, Virginia.
We conducted a study on FBI agents, and the purpose of this study was to see if we could determine whether an individual is an FBI agent or not based on his or her brainwaves. If we can determine an FBI agent, then we could determine whether somebody is an agent of some, say, foreign intelligence organization or a criminal group, just based on their brain responses.
Each subject was presented with a series of words on a computer screen. Many were FBI acronyms or terms familiar only to agents. The FBI agents were specifically told to do everything they could to conceal from Farwell that they were in any way connected with the Bureau. The participant's brain response to each stimulus was measured by electrodes on a headband. The electrodes were wired to the brainwave analysis software of Farwell's system.
So what we did is to present stimuli, phrases, that only an FBI agent, because of their training, would know, mixed in with others. The FBI agents recognized them. We picked up the brain responses. We knew that they were FBI agents.
The principle behind the brain fingerprinting system is very simple. Farwell has discovered that the memory centers of the human brain respond to the sight of familiar stimuli with a distinct change in electrical activity. He calls this change a murmur.
And that is the specific brain response that we measure, that we analyze with a computer, in order to determine whether an individual recognizes the words or pictures that we flashed on the screen that are relevant to the crime or to whatever it is that we're investigating.
When the subject sees anything on the screen, it creates a pattern of brain activity. A murmur is increased brain activity produced when the subject recognizes what he's seeing.
This headband will measure the electrobrain
The test participants who did not work for the FBI did not recognize the specific FBI stimuli, so no murmurs were detected.
Some of them relevant to the FBI and some of them not.
Researchers with the United States Navy also heard the claims made about the system. They devised a test of their own to see if brain fingerprinting could distinguish military medical students from civilians. They used a list of acronyms specific to medicine and the military. Lieutenant Commander Rene Hernandez conducted the test.
The test was 100% accurate. They were able to tell each and every one. The trick with this is not so much if the technique works properly. The trick is if you ask the right questions. Because if they had not come up with a group of really good acronyms that only the students would know, then they wouldn't be able to determine the difference between the medical students and the staff, for example. So the trick is in being clever enough to ask the correct questions, because the brain will always answer it honestly.
Careful preparation of the words or pictures for a session is vital for accurate, useful results. The questions must be phrased in such a way that when a murmur occurs, it is clear why. In a murder investigation, both a witness to a shooting and the shooter might show a murmur when confronted with the murder weapon.
You have two people, only one person actually committed the crime. You have another person who simply saw it. They have the same information in their brain, so you have to get that, you have to ask the questions properly.
Rigorously constructed lab tests are one thing, but how would the brain fingerprinting system work on the front lines of a murder investigation? Could Dr. Farwell's computer read the mind of an actual killer? Like a page torn from a science fiction novel, brain fingerprinting might be the next century's most powerful new forensic tool. No criminal's secrets would be safe when his own brain waves could bring him to justice. Captain Blaine Corral, commander of the Investigations Division of the Alexandria, Virginia Police, has also tested the system. Though he was initially skeptical about its use in the real world, he was quickly won over.
The vision I had was like of the Three Stooges with a salad bowl sitting on the top of someone's head with wires coming out of it. And I thought, not only would this technique or this technology never really be useful, but there's no way in the world it would ever be accepted by the law enforcement community.
Corral compared brain fingerprinting with the polygraph, the lie detector used by law enforcement for many years. The polygraph is still not admissible in court, but has become a standard tool to guide police.
The polygraph works on the theory that you can't control your heart rate or something called your galvanic skin response or your breathing patterns. The brain fingerprinting sort of takes that a step further and recognizes the fact that you can't control the electrical activity in your brain.
A polygraph registers only stress or emotional responses, such as heart and respiration rates and sweating. By analyzing the readings, the operator tries to discern whether a subject is being truthful or deceptive in his answers. But in some cases, the polygraph can be fooled. Brain fingerprinting is often more general. It can identify the presence of hidden information in persons fraudulently claiming either knowledge or ignorance of certain facts. But again, it reveals only the presence of the information, not the details.
So they're going to both help us toward the same end, which is ultimately to find out the truth about what we're investigating and formulate the best case for presentation in court, but they're going to sort of attack it from different angles. Both can be very crucial to a successful case.
Serious questions remain about the wholesale application of Dr. Farwell's invention. Would a murmur be revealed if a killer were in a drunken blackout or a psychotic state when he took his victim's life? In such cases, there might not be a brain fingerprint after the fact. What if right after he committed the crime, the killer received a severe head trauma?
But that's what actually happened with the the person who was the bodyguard who was in the car with Princess Diana. Everybody thinks he's trying to cover up something. He had such a severe traumatic injury, he probably will never remember that because the brain never was healthy enough to store that information into long-term memory.
In most cases, brain fingerprinting a witness or an accomplice can reveal knowledge of all kinds of crime, from espionage to terrorist plots. At least that's the promise of this technology. Brain fingerprinting is not yet admissible in the United States, but it might be only a matter of time before it becomes a routine tool. The relatively new technique of DNA profiling is known to be so dead-on accurate that genetic evidence is readily accepted. Ultimately, scientists and criminal investigators agree that brain fingerprinting shows great potential in murder investigations. In a shooting death with no witnesses, the killer would be the only person with intimate knowledge of the crime. With Dr. Farwell's computer, the murderer's own brain could become a witness for the prosecution. Technology is providing new ways to reveal evidence that would have been lost or unavailable just a few years ago. Today, investigators can peer beneath paint, lift a smudged palm print from a bedsheet, and perhaps even tap into a suspect's memory to find the truth. There may be no way to completely stop crime, but forensic science is finding ever more ingenious tactics to catch criminals. Canadian police are on the hunt for a missing woman. Though all indications suggest murder, they must rely on a single strand of animal hair to prove it. When an Ohio woman vanishes, suspicions swirl around her husband. What police lack is hard evidence. In Missouri, a man is found brutally murdered.
Doesn't look like it.
To catch his killer, police must piece together his final minutes. Sometimes, the murder suspect is immediately apparent, but the proof remains elusive. When there are no witnesses to speak for a victim, forensic scientists must transform the smallest clue into a material witness. Tucked away in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the southeast corner of Canada lies the remote and sparsely populated Prince Edward Island. On October 7th, 1994, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, responded to a complaint about an abandoned vehicle found on private property. When the constable arrived, he discovered the car resting a few hundred yards off a private road. No tags were present.
41 to base.
A check on the vehicle identification number revealed it was registered to a woman named Shirley Duguay.
Number IG4, AB69.
Police arranged to have the vehicle impounded and then began trying to track down the owner. But when the woman failed to return their calls, detectives decided to go to her address. There, they were met by Shirley Duguay's father and her children's babysitter. The news of the abandoned car concerned them. Shirley, they said, had not been heard from in some time. The babysitter said that she last saw the 32-year-old mother of 5 4 days earlier. Shirley was leaving to run some errands.
Make sure that he eats all the cereal.
She never mentioned where she was going. She said goodbye and promised to be back in a few hours. For RCMP Inspector Alphonse McNeil, the story had raised a troubling question.
We wondered why they didn't report her missing. They said that they were concerned that an ex-common law spouse by the name of Douglas Beamish, who she had the three young children with, would end up getting the children if social services found out that she was missing or gone. So they tried to hold back that information as long as they could, hoping that they would find her.
For investigators, the time for waiting was over. Fearing that harm may have come to Shirley Duguay, police processed her abandoned vehicle for clues. What they found was not encouraging. Dozens of tiny reddish-brown stains tested positive for human blood. And barely visible blood-stain patterns found on the windshield and larger ones on the seat were consistent with having been caused by someone being punched or bludgeoned.
There was blood in the vehicle. Shirley Duguay had been missing for 4 days, so we were concerned that Shirley Duguay had met some form of demise in that vehicle.
Investigators returned to the area where the abandoned car had been found. For hours, the search for clues to the young woman's fate turned up nothing. Then, 500 meters from where the car was discovered, investigators found something. It was a pillow stained with what appeared to be blood. And a short distance away lay a blood-stained t-shirt. A shovel was also found nearby. All of the findings pointed to murder. And the shovel led police to believe that Shirley had likely been buried somewhere close by. But a thorough search failed to produce the victim's body. Now, police wanted to speak with the man who had the most to gain from her disappearance. Her ex-common law husband and the father of 3 of her children. Doug Beamish admitted that he and Shirley's relationship had been troubled in the past. And he realized that her family probably blamed him for her disappearance. But he insisted he knew nothing about it. For the sake of the children, he and Shirley had managed to work out their problems. He said he last saw her a week or so earlier. He had been having car problems, and Shirley offered to give him a ride to a job site where he was employed as a construction worker. On the way there, they had a pleasant conversation about their kids and planned to speak more later. She then dropped him off at the site, and the two said goodbye. He hadn't heard from her since. Doug Beamish sensed that something was bothering Shirley. He speculated that she had left town to visit some friends in Toronto. But it turned out that no one there had heard from her in some time.
RCMP Inspector McNeil speaking.
Then, police got a call.
North End 1?
A woman who had been following the case in the media believed she had important information.
This lady called and she said, I remember back around the time that Shirley Duguay went missing, I saw a car similar to hers on a road called the Allen Road, which would be about 20 kilometers away from where we found the car. I remember it was in the evening, it was dark. I saw 2 people on the side of the road, a tall man, a very small woman. They appeared to be arguing, and I just drove by, and I don't know if it's any good to you or not.
The woman couldn't be certain she had in fact seen Shirley Duguay. Still, the information was enough for police to search the area where the caller had seen the couple. But to cover the several square miles, they knew they needed help. Personnel from the Canadian Army agreed to participate in the search. For several days, their efforts turned up nothing. But then, they found something that seemed out of place.
One group came across a white plastic bag. We had a police officer with every group of searchers from the military. The police officer seized the bag.
The search of the area failed to produce any additional evidence. At the crime lab, examiners carefully removed the contents of the plastic bag. They recovered an old pair of white tennis shoes. There was also a large man's jacket stuffed inside. Several fibers and a single white hair were recovered. But further scrutiny revealed the presence of tiny stains that tested positive for human blood. Based on the information provided by the witness, police believed it had originated from Shirley Duguay. Now they needed to prove it. But there was a problem.
We didn't have Shirley Duguay, so we needed to be able to develop a DNA profile. The way we did that's what's called, in some cases, reverse paternity. We took a sample from her father, her brother, and her 2 sons.
Though everyone's DNA is unique, a genetic family resemblance exists among blood relatives. When the genetic profiles were compared, examiners concluded that the blood found on all of the evidence had originated from Shirley Duguay. Though the 32-year-old mother's whereabouts remained uncertain, all the evidence suggested she had been the victim of a violent crime. Police on Canada's Prince Edward Island continued searching for missing 32-year-old mother of 5, Shirley Duguay. Though efforts to find her had gone unsuccessful, authorities had found clues suggesting she had met with a violent fate. Among them was a man's jacket, found stained with blood that had originated from Shirley. Looking for clues as to who might want to harm the young mother, officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police questioned Shirley's friends. They all believed that Shirley's ex-husband, Doug Beamish, was somehow involved in the disappearance. Recently, Shirley had started dating again. That had enraged her possessive and jealous ex-husband. And Doug Beamish had a history of violence.
When was the last time you saw those guys?
But the friend didn't recall if Beamish owned a jacket like the one found with Shirley's blood on it. Doug Beamish was emerging as the prime suspect in Shirley Duguay's disappearance.
Andre's down with the IN guys right now looking.
But so far, investigators had no physical evidence to prove it.
But, you know, without that jacket being able to tie it to someone wearing, we don't have much. Andre, how did you make out with
Then they got a break.
We've got something. IDAN just came back. They found some white cat hair on the inside of the jacket. And all I could think about all the way down here was Beamish and his white cat in his house.
That was all RCMP Inspector Alphonse McNeil needed to hear.
We knew that he had a white cat and there were white hairs in the jacket. So the process then was to find a lab that could examine these if we were able to seize from blood from the cat.
With a warrant in hand, police and a local veterinarian returned to Doug Beamish's house. The suspect continued to deny any involvement in Shirley's disappearance and claimed that he didn't own a jacket like the one stained with her blood. Though it seemed like a long shot, authorities took possession of his cat, Snowball, hopeful they could somehow establish a genetic link to the hair found on the blood-stained jacket. Blood and hair samples were collected from Beamish's cat. But now, investigators had to find someone who was an expert in analyzing cat DNA. At the National Cancer Institute in Frederick, Maryland, they found one. There, biologist Dr. Stephen O'Brien has looked to the feline genetic code for help in medical research. When contacted, he agreed to help Canadian police. But Dr. O'Brien and his team never imagined that by cracking the feline genetic code, they might also help crack a baffling criminal case. The request to match a cat's DNA was unique in medical and legal history. First, examiners generated a genetic profile of the white hair pulled from the bloody jacket. Once completed, the results were then compared to the profile generated from the samples taken from Snowball.
What we discovered was that the genotype was identical to what we had seen in the jacket hair. So we were pretty sure that the jacket hair had come from a cat which had the same genotype as Snowball.
Though the scientists felt confident about the results, they could not be absolutely certain of them. It was possible that the few thousand cats roaming on the isolated Prince Edward Island shared a common ancestry. To find out, biologists needed to generate more DNA profiles of other cats on the island.
We had to determine what the status of the population was so that we could make the calculation of how likely it was that we were wrong in pronouncing a match.
Examiners went to work developing the genetic profiles of 20 randomly selected cats on the island. When O'Brien compared the results, he found that none shared a DNA signature similar to Snowball's. In fact, the odds that the hair found on the jacket had not come from Beamish's cat were 45 million to 1.
Please, and your socks.
Through Snowball, authorities had established a link between Doug Beamish and a jacket stained with his ex-wife's blood. But Inspector Alphonse McNeil wasn't satisfied.
Please step out 1 foot at a time.
Next, he obtained a warrant to collect impressions of the suspect's feet.
Good. Just step out 1 foot at a time.
Now, he hoped to tie the suspect to the pair of white running shoes found with the jacket.
We thought, well, if we can put those running shoes on the feet of Douglas Beamish somehow, that would be pretty solid evidence besides his cat.
Dr. Keith Bettles, a forensic podiatrist, received the evidence. He began by creating plaster casts of the suspect's feet in order to reveal all of the unique characteristics.
People's feet are unique because we walk on them all the time. We have lots of different stresses, lots of different forces on our feet. Feet are practically as individual as fingerprints.
The casts of Beamish's feet lined up perfectly with all of the wear patterns observed on the insoles of the white shoes. A single strand of cat hair and a discarded pair of shoes had given investigators the evidence they needed to implicate Doug Beamish in the disappearance of his ex-common-law wife. Then, 7 months after Shirley Duguay went missing, badly decomposed human remains were discovered buried in a remote wooded area. Dental records later confirmed that the victim was Shirley Duguay. And the medical examiner classified her death as a homicide. A short while later, Douglas Beamish was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators believe that Beamish couldn't handle Shirley Duguay dating other men. Somehow, he manipulated her into giving him a ride in her car and directed her to a remote spot. Once there, he beat his ex-common-law wife to death. He then buried her body in a remote area and abandoned the car. Douglas Beamish was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. No place is immune from violent crime. And even the friendliest towns have their problems. Mansfield, Ohio has been called one of America's most livable cities, which makes what happened here all the more surprising. On January 2nd, 1990, a woman came in to speak with Mansfield police.
Yes, ma'am. What can I do for you?
She was concerned that something had happened to her friend, 44-year-old Noreen Boyle. When she last saw her friend a few days earlier, Noreen was shaken and visibly upset. Her marriage of more than 22 years was falling apart. And not only was her husband moving nearly 200 miles away to Erie, Pennsylvania, but he would likely take the couple's 2 children with him. Noreen was devastated. When she tried to contact her, Noreen's husband, a prominent local physician, said Noreen had packed up and left town after a fight. But the friend couldn't believe that Noreen would walk out on her 2 children. Mansfield police agreed to look into the case. And their first step was to question Noreen's husband, Dr. John Boyle. When Lieutenant David Messmore arrived at the residence, he learned that John Boyle was out of town. John Boyle's mother explained that he had driven to Erie, Pennsylvania a few days earlier, where he was opening up his new medical practice. He was due back later that evening. When questioned, she said that Noreen walked out on the family a few days earlier, and she was watching the couple's children until her son John returned home. The woman excused herself to check on the Boyles' baby daughter. Then, the couple's son approached the detective.
My mom would never do something like that.
He said he was afraid something bad had happened to his mother. But before he could explain, his grandmother returned.
I'm really sorry. I have no more information.
When she saw what was happening, she ended the interview and asked the detective to
I
leave.
really have nothing more to tell you. I really need to have you leave.
The encounter troubled police.
He's from Mansfield.
And Lieutenant Messmore couldn't ignore that Dr. Boyle had left town around the same time his wife was reported missing.
I'm not sure where it's at.
But he soon learned that the reason for the doctor's trip to Pennsylvania checked out.
He had been hired by a very large medical corporation in Erie, Pennsylvania. So he was basically traveling back and forth between Mansfield and Erie for some period of time.
But where was Noreen Boyle? Later that evening, Detective Messmore returned to the residence. His visit had been anticipated. Dr. Boyle's lawyer answered the door.
You represent Dr. Boyle? I do. Oh, okay. Is he home right now?
Well, his client had in fact returned home from Pennsylvania. But because of the strain caused by the impending divorce, Dr. Boyle did not wish to discuss Noreen with police.
All right, well, I'll get with you later.
It wasn't the response investigators expected.
I was somewhat stunned that in the event of a missing person in your family, you would hire an attorney to represent you when there's no accusations or even any allegations of wrongdoing or even criminal matters involving the family. So that was certainly a very unusual situation.
I was not the only nurse.
To find out what Dr. Boyle might be trying to hide, police questioned his friends and co-workers. Professionally, all agreed Dr. Boyle had an impeccable reputation. But personally, he was known to be a womanizer and rumored to be involved in numerous affairs. In fact, one of his alleged mistresses was pregnant. And everyone speculated that the child belonged to Dr. Boyle. Though that made him a bad husband, it didn't mean he was capable of physical violence. In fact, only one person seemed to believe otherwise, and that was the Boyle son. Concerned for the child's well-being, Lieutenant Messmore caught up with him after school. The child was eager to tell his story. He said that the night before his mom disappeared, the sound of his parents arguing outside his bedroom woke him up.
I heard a big thump on the wall.
He heard a loud
And my
thud,
dad came
and then there was
to the living room
silence.
to check if I was sleeping.
A few seconds later, his dad peeked into his room. The boy was afraid and pretended to be asleep. The next morning, his mom was gone. His dad told him that she packed up and left. But he didn't believe his mom would leave without saying goodbye.
Did you have a conversation with your dad at all?
Though police had no evidence that a crime had been committed, they began to theorize that the noise heard by the child might have been the sound of his own mother being assaulted, or worse. Police in Mansfield, Ohio continued their search for missing mother of two, Noreen Boyle. And now they theorized that her husband, Dr. John Boyle, was somehow involved. Though police had no hard evidence that a crime had taken place, they were able to obtain a warrant to search the Boyles' Ohio residence. Using luminol, a chemical that reacts to the proteins found in blood, technicians began scouring the house. But their efforts failed to turn up any evidence of a violent crime. Still, investigators persisted. To learn more, they contacted authorities in Erie, Pennsylvania, where Dr. Boyle was setting up his new medical practice.
Hi, Mill Creek Township Police Department.
Pennsylvania detectives tracked down a real estate agent there who had recently sold a house to Dr. Boyle and a pregnant woman who introduced herself as his wife. She recalled that Dr. Boyle was particularly interested in the home's concrete basement floor. He said he was eager to tear it up in order to build a playroom for his children. He offered to pay the asking price as long as he could take possession of the house immediately. The real estate agent turned over the sales agreement, which was signed by both the doctor and his wife. Pennsylvania authorities forwarded a copy to Mansfield Police Lieutenant David Messmore.
In that copy, it was noted that Dr. Boyle signed it, and also an N. Sherry Boyle. And checking further into the background, it was quite obvious that Noreen's name was not Sherry for a middle name.
Dr. Boyle had purchased the home with a woman pretending to be his wife. Investigators subpoenaed the suspect's most recent credit card statements. They learned that he had used his card to rent a jackhammer and to purchase indoor-outdoor carpeting and a load of concrete. Suddenly, all of the pieces were adding up.
I had the feeling and very strong suspicion that the body would be in that location.
Pennsylvania authorities issued a warrant to search the basement of Dr. Boyle's new home. Beneath some shelving and the indoor-outdoor carpeting, they found a badly poured patch of concrete. It was roughly the size of a makeshift grave. A crew was called in to dig up the concrete floor. After some time, they recognized the unmistakable smell of a decaying body. Then, a few feet down, they discovered a tarp. And inside were the badly decomposed remains of a human body. After carefully excavating the grave, the remains were transported to the medical examiner's office. A watch and other pieces of jewelry worn by the victim matched the description of those worn by Noreen Boyle. And dental records confirmed that the victim was, in fact, the 44-year-old mother of two. Noreen had been savagely murdered.
Look for Dr. Boyle.
On January 26, 1990, almost a month after his wife disappeared, Dr. John Boyle was arrested in Ohio for suspicion of killing Noreen. Despite the evidence against him, the doctor maintained his innocence.
Okay, sir.
Someone was trying to frame him. That seemed ridiculous to investigators. But to ensure a conviction, they needed an eyewitness or physical evidence directly linking him to the homicide. And so far, they had neither. It was possible that Dr. Boyle could get away with murder. But then, nearly a week after Dr. John Boyle's arrest, a Mansfield, Ohio resident made a strange discovery. A pile of concrete had been dumped on the remote property. The field was nearly 200 miles away from where Noreen Boyle's body had been unearthed. But the man had followed the case in the media and thought there might be a connection. A crime scene technician was dispatched to the scene. After photographing the area, the concrete was collected into evidence. Police later determined that the property was owned by a close friend of Dr. Boyle's. The doctor had been there on numerous occasions. But to prove murder, police now needed to show that the concrete found in Ohio had originated in the suspect's Pennsylvania home. Police had found missing 44-year-old Noreen Boyle buried in the basement of her husband's new Pennsylvania home. Though investigators had a strong circumstantial case against her husband, they hoped a pile of concrete found in an Ohio field could physically link him to the murder. The samples collected from the field, along with concrete taken from the crime scene, were sent to CTL Engineering in Columbus, Ohio. There, lab supervisor Larry Piscitelli is an expert in analyzing the microscopic nature of rocks and concrete. Without being told where the individual samples had come from, he was asked to determine if any of the concrete pieces had originated from the same source. To analyze the internal structure of the concrete, the samples are cut into cross-sectional pieces using a diamond-tipped saw. Once completed, the surfaces are smoothed and polished. Then, Piscitelli subjected the evidence to a high-powered microscope. Concrete is a mixture of stones, gravel, and sand, called aggregate, bound together by a cement paste and some trapped air. With the help of a computer, Piscitelli measures and counts each of these components. To the average eye, all concrete looks pretty much alike. But in fact, each chunk has a unique story.
Each piece of concrete is usually different because the components vary slightly. Even if they come from the same load of concrete, two different samples from the same truckload can be different because the percentages of the air voids, the small entrained or entrapped air voids, can be slightly different.
Piscitelli was unable to find significant similarities between most of the samples. But when he analyzed the results, he found that two of the pieces stood out from the rest. They shared the exact same number of unique components.
These two pieces of concrete had some unique characteristics that were peculiar just to those two pieces of concrete. And based on all the data and analysis, the numbers being exactly the same, I was able to show that those two pieces of concrete came from the same structure.
Of the two samples that matched, one had come from the pile of rubble found in Mansfield, Ohio. The other was collected in the basement of the suspect's new home in Erie, Pennsylvania. Police now had enough to charge Dr. John Boyle with murder. Police believe that John Boyle murdered his wife in the couple's home in order to start a new life with his pregnant mistress. After the kill, he drove her body to Pennsylvania and buried her in a grave he had dug in the basement of his new home. Investigators theorize he then returned to Ohio and dumped the leftover concrete on his friend's property. Dr. John Boyle was convicted of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. John Boyle thought he'd buried all evidence of his crime. But in fact, the trail of evidence spanned 200 miles. Other murders are more local, but the road to solving them can be just as long. In Harrison County, Missouri, on June 26, 1995, a farmer out for a walk noticed a foul odor. At first, he thought that maybe one of his livestock had died. But the reality was much worse. Hidden among some overgrowth lay the lifeless body of a man. After receiving the 911 call, dispatchers contacted officers of the Major Case Squad, a group of law enforcement personnel from several neighboring jurisdictions. Bethany Police Chief George Martz was among the first to respond to the scene.
We had no idea when we arrived who the victim was. There was no identification on the body that we were able to determine at that time.
But the manner in which he died was clear. He had been shot several times. Police recovered an empty box of ammunition. And a few feet away, they found several spent shotgun shell casings. Then, Sheriff Greg Kuhn from the nearby Grundy County Sheriff's Department arrived at the location. He believed he recognized the victim as a local resident by the name of Al Pinniger.
After I looked at the body, I felt that it might have been Al Pinniger, who I had dealt with in the past in Grundy County. Really couldn't tell for sure, but it just appeared to me that might be who it was.
Unsure what was evidence and what was roadside trash, investigators collected numerous items scattered around the area. They found and collected a small plastic clock. On the back was torn adhesive with tiny synthetic fibers clinging to it. They also located a single strand of brown leather lying in the middle of the road. Police hoped that somewhere among the debris were clues that could explain this brutal murder. At autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that the victim had died as a result of several 12-gauge shotgun blasts. He'd been shot twice in the back and once in the face. The victim's fingerprints were lifted and then passed on to Harrison County Police. Investigators requested Al Pinniger's fingerprint card, which was on file in Grundy County. When they compared those prints with the ones taken from the homicide victim, they found a perfect match. Now, detectives from the Major Case Squad had to figure out who wanted Al Pinniger dead.
How's your case going?
Soon they got their first break.
Okay, when did she report him missing?
Police learned that the victim had been reported missing a few days before his body was discovered,
Okay, thanks for calling.
and the report had been filed by his fiancée. Police immediately arranged for an interview. The victim's fiancée told detectives that she and Al had been living together for some time. She said that she last saw him a few hours before he went missing.
Need anything from the store?
She had left the house to go run a few errands.
All right, see you later.
Al said he was going to cut the grass and do some work around the house. He hadn't mentioned any plans to leave that day.
5 days ago.
Recently, she had been trying to help him overcome a drug problem. He had been doing his best to stay far away from his drug-dealing friends.
John Middleton and
Usually stay in the middle of the lawn, or was the grass?
She suspected, however, that he had seen some of them that day. When she returned home later that afternoon, she passed a pickup truck coming out of her neighborhood. She didn't see Al in the truck, but she knew the vehicle belonged to a couple that he used to deal drugs with.
So he's been dealing with drugs?
She believed Al may have been ducking down to avoid being seen.
when I was driving.
When the fiancé arrived home, she discovered that Al and his 12-gauge shotgun were gone. The information provided police with their first real lead.
Okay, guys, here's what we got.
They ran a background check on the couple, identified as John Middleton and his girlfriend Maggie Hodges.
Decomposed. You and Rodney.
Middleton had an extensive criminal record, mostly involving drug-related offenses. To find out why he may have wanted to harm Al Pinniger, police tracked down Middleton's known associates. One informant described Middleton as an extremely unstable and violent person.
Hodges and Middleton.
He said that as a result of police efforts to crack down on local drug dealers, John Middleton had become increasingly paranoid. He threatened to kill people he did business with if he found out they were cooperating with authorities. No one doubted him for a minute. Everyone was afraid of him. All of the information led police to suspect that Middleton's paranoia had likely led to the murder of Al Pinniger. And they hoped that somewhere among the shotgun shells and the assorted litter collected from the crime scene was the means to prove it. Police in Harrison County, Missouri believed that a local drug dealer and his girlfriend were responsible for the brutal shotgun slaying of 29-year-old Alfred Pinniger. To prove it, investigators needed to physically link the suspects to the crime scene. Though several potential clues had been found there, an empty box of shotgun shells looked to be the most promising lead. A price sticker found on the box led investigators to the store where the ammo had originated. An employee there pulled recent sales records. According to receipts, several boxes of shells were bought on the day of the murder. The clerk recalled that 2 men and a woman had come in together to make the purchases. She also remembered something else. A few hours after the purchase, 2 of the 3 customers returned to the store. They had unused cartridges and wanted to return them for a refund. The clerk didn't recall seeing the other man who had been in with them earlier. When shown photographs, she picked out Al Pinniger, John Middleton, and Maggie Hodges as the 3 who bought the boxes of ammo earlier that day.
Did she come back the second time?
Yeah.
And she identified Middleton and Hodges as the two who came back to return the unused ammo. Though the evidence didn't prove murder, it was enough for police to obtain arrest warrants. Believing that Middleton and his girlfriend were capable of great violence, police cautiously approached the house they shared together. John Middleton was quickly subdued. Moments later, Maggie Hodges was also taken into custody. After the suspects were removed from the scene, police began searching for proof of murder. Inside Middleton's pickup truck, they collected a fringed brown leather jacket. As the search continued, technicians found a potential clue. Bethany Police Chief George Martz.
We took a piece of the dashboard from the Middleton truck that had a sticky substance on it, and on that sticky substance were fibers. Those fibers appeared to match the clock we found at the crime scene. So we removed a piece of the dash, the entire dash, and sent that to the lab for analysis.
All of the evidence was forwarded to the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab, located in Jefferson City. There, criminalist Kathleen Green worked the case. Almost immediately, she noticed that the fringes on the brown leather jacket appeared identical to a piece of brown leather found at the crime scene.
I looked at the jacket to see if there was any fringe missing from it, and did find an area where there was a piece of fringe missing. I then compared the question end of the fringe to the question area on the jacket to determine if it was originally attached to it.
Though the pieces lined up well, Green was unable to conclusively state that the piece of leather had in fact come from Middleton's jacket. She turned her attention to the stick-on clock found near Al Pinniger's body. When she compared the adhesive on the back of the clock to the adhesive stuck to Middleton's dashboard, she found numerous similarities.
It was the same size, it had the same coloring, they were both made of the same type of material.
When the torn edges of the two pieces were placed side by side under a comparison microscope, examiners found a match. Next, fibers found on the stick-on clock were compared to carpet samples collected from the vehicle. Criminalist Jenny Smith found one consistency after another.
We determined that the fiber from the clock face, this would have been considered the question fiber, was similar in physical and chemical composition to the fiber from the suspect vehicle. Therefore, we would conclude that this fiber, question fiber, could have come from this vehicle.
When confronted with the evidence, Middleton was uncooperative.
This is your opportunity to tell your side of the story. We know what the story is.
But his resistance didn't matter. Police had pieced together the motive behind the murder.
Do you think about this real long?
My belief is that Mr. Middleton thought Alfred Pinniger was about to rat him out to the police department and to law enforcement authorities, and Mr. Middleton was not going to allow that to happen. You're in some bad trouble.
But Middleton was wrong. The victim had made no attempt to contact authorities. Police believe that on the day of the murder, John Middleton and Maggie Hodges drove to Al Pinniger's house. They asked him to go target shooting, and he agreed. What he didn't know was that he was the intended target. At some point, however, that became clear. A scuffle started inside the car. Pinniger escaped, but he didn't get far. John Middleton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Maggie Hodges pled guilty and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. It takes motive and opportunity to commit a murder. And it takes hard evidence to solve one. When clues are few, forensics experts provide the know-how to turn the most ordinary object into a material witness. Women are turning up dead in their offices in suburban Texas. Bodies are found only a few miles apart. Investigators must link the crimes together in the hopes of stopping a killer before he strikes again. A convenience store owner is stabbed to death in broad daylight. Although the crime scene yields few leads, the victim's bones reveal the signature of the killer. Scientists must piece together small clues to solve the crimes. Often, criminals are careful to leave no evidence behind. But the methods of the murder itself can create a lasting impression, especially when the tools of a trade leave an innocent victim marked for death. Houston, Texas, one of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the United States, boasts economic growth and rapid expansion. It's a mecca for people seeking a better life and greater opportunities. But in 1996, Houston's suburban workforce found themselves terrorized at the hands of a sadistic killer. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on January 5th, Jerry Cowan returned to the storage rental facility he owned with his wife Rita in Spring, Texas. Cowan was surprised to find the door to Rita's office locked and the closed sign posted on the door.
Rita! Rita!
Panicked, Jerry smashed the window.
Rita! Rita!
The office appeared ransacked. But what Jerry saw next was devastating. He notified police.
Hold on for the sheriff's department, please.
Quick! Quick!
A nearby patrolman arrived within minutes.
Joking! She's been found! Okay. She's been found! She's in here.
But it was still too late.
There she is. Okay.
All right, sir, I need you to stay in here, okay? Just stay in here. Let me see
Rita
what's going on.
Cowan was dead on arrival.
4833, we have a confirmed DOA. We need a supervisor.
Crime scene investigators were called to the residence. It appeared she was strangled with a self-locking plastic tie wrap. Rita's hands and feet were bound, and investigators speculated she worked one hand free in a desperate attempt to stay alive. Harris County Detective Ben Bell investigated.
You were saying something about the money box?
It was a very brutal way to die. The tie wrap around the neck, our victim would have known that she was dying. There wasn't any way to get the tie wrap off of her neck. The motive appears to be robbery. We believe it was premeditated because the murder weapon, the tie wraps, were brought to the scene from outside the scene.
The zip tie wraps were an industrial gauge plastic.
The money box is over here on the counter.
Investigators searched the apartment and office for clues to the killer's identity. Although money was stolen from the cash box, it was something else that caught Detective Bell's eye.
A cash box, money. What's this over here?
It's a contract.
A partially filled out rental form.
308 out here. Laying on the desk was a contract that was used by the mini storage warehouse people, and all of the company information was filled out and the storage unit number was written on it, but there wasn't any customer information on the contract.
Detectives began their investigation looking to those closest to the victim, hoping for answers.
With any type of homicide, you start basically at home, move out from the home, the family.
Detective Bell interviewed the victim's husband, Jerry Cowan.
Get a little bit of information from you. What time did you get home this afternoon?
About 5:15.
And where were you coming from?
Work.
Just based on the circumstances that he was one of the last people to see her alive. I talked to him extensively, obtained a statement from him.
Cowan told the detective he saw his wife Rita alive that morning as he was leaving for work around 8 a.m.
Want to come today?
No, I think I'll wait till
They
tomorrow.
talked about running some errands, and everything seemed fine.
I got 3 more days, actually.
All right.
When Cowan returned from work around 5:30, he found his wife dead.
And he was able to pretty well alibi himself for the entire day he was at work.
At the autopsy, the medical examiner noted deep abrasions to the victim's neck. The ligature around her neck was drawn with extreme force. She didn't have a chance to survive. The official cause of death was listed as strangulation. Additional contusions were found on the victim's bound wrists and ankles. The plastic tie wraps provided the killer with a weapon that combined efficiency and deadly force. The tie wraps were sent to the Harris County Crime Lab for analysis. Matthew Clements is a tool mark examiner at the lab.
In tool mark identification, you have to be able to recognize a pattern across a three-dimensional item that it's going to have shape to it, as opposed to a flat, a flat piece of paper or something like that. So you have to train your eye and train your mind to look at these things across 3 dimensions.
The tie wraps were industrial grade, common to the electrical and air conditioning trades. At first, they appeared to be generic, with no distinguishing features. But under magnification, Clements noticed something.
The ends of the cable ties had been cut. There were tool marks present.
This was a key discovery because tools, in this case a pair of pliers or wire cutters, leave distinctive marks, and the ties were cut to equal lengths.
The wire cutters have a blade, and that blade actually presses into the plastic strap. The surface variations of the blade are going to scratch, basically, a set of lines on that cut surface. These are the striations that we use for comparison. Much like a fingerprint's identified to an individual, you're identifying that set of markings to an individual tool.
Investigators believed if they found the tool that cut the tie wraps, they also might find the killer.
It can break a case. It can be it could be the linchpin of your case if you don't have any fingerprints or you don't have any DNA, if you don't have any other evidence actually linking your suspect to your scene. If there are tool marks left behind, that's as good of an identification if that tool was recovered from his possession.
Crime lab technicians also analyzed the rental agreement found at the crime scene. for possible fingerprints undetectable to the naked eye. Latent print examiner Gail Mills.
When the document was discovered to be partially filled out, we knew that it had been handled. On a porous item, such as this paper, when a person touches the paper, the residue from the fingerprints is then transferred to the document or the paper. And within this residue is things like fats and oils and salts and amino acids.
Mills applied a chemical called DFO to process the paper.
The DFO reacts to the amino acids in the residue of the fingerprint.
The paper is then dried, and the latent print is studied using an alternate light source.
A light source is an intense forensic light that we use to view certain types of evidence. There's varying wavelengths within the light source that you can change to cause different types of evidence to fluoresce. The document is examined under those light sources, and if the latent print is there that has reacted with the amino acids, it should fluoresce.
Deputy Mills had isolated one fingerprint that did not match the victim's.
At that point, the fingerprint needs to be photographed in order to preserve it. So that's what I did in this case.
It was now up to investigators to link the unidentified print to a suspect. At the Harris County Sheriff's Office, Detective Bell reviewed the evidence. Although he knew the plastic zip ties were cleanly cut and the killer left behind a fingerprint, neither clue brought him any closer to a suspect. Detective Bell went back to Rita's husband, Jerry Cowan, and asked him to check his residence to see if any additional items in the cash box were missing. Cowan scoured the apartment and discovered some jewelry, and 2 money orders were also missing. Investigators looked to trace the money orders.
Jerry recalled that about 2 or 3 days prior to the murder, he and his wife had purchased 2 money orders from the grocery store close to their residence. They used the money orders to pay their bills. One money order was for several $100s, was used to pay the car payment, and then there was a second money order for $10.
Jerry Cowan said he knew the money orders were stolen because the carbon receipts were missing. Since the money orders were as good as cash, Detective Bell believed the killer may have been motivated by money. He set out to track down the money orders.
Ma'am, I'm going to go ahead and show you pictures.
Harris County detectives showed the clerk a picture of Rita Cowan.
Yeah, she might have come in Monday or Tuesday last week.
The clerk remembered Rita purchasing the money orders,
Yeah,
but there was a problem.
probably Monday.
The store didn't keep records of the money orders.
No, I have.
Investigators moved quickly and contacted the company that issued them.
So we'd have to call the company itself to verify
If you call the company and you give them that number, they can trace it.
Okay. Hey, this is Detective Bell with the Sheriff's Office in Houston. I'm trying to trace a couple of money orders. I contacted the money order company and advised them that we're working a homicide. The money order company told me that they could track the money orders for us, but that it would take them several weeks before they could get back with us.
Detectives know if they don't have a suspect within 48 hours, their chances of ever solving the crime drop dramatically. Any delay in a homicide investigation would keep the killer on the streets longer. And as detectives quickly learned, the delay would also prove to be deadly. Detectives were struggling to solve the vicious murder of Rita Cowan, but their killer seemed to be one step ahead of them. In neighboring Montgomery County, Just 17 days after Rita Cowan was killed, another woman was found strangled in her office. The victim was real estate agent Janice Vogel. Her hands and feet had been bound with red electrical wiring, and around her neck was a thick plastic tie wrap, just like the one used to strangle Rita Cowan. News of Janice Vogel's murder quickly spread throughout the Houston metro area, and people were frightened.
Ben, hey, just watching the news, and Montgomery County is working on a deal.
A detective in the Harris County Sheriff's Office saw the story and quickly recognized similarities to the Rita Cowan murder.
Apparently strangled. I jotted down some notes and everything like that. Maybe you can give them a call and see what they're up to.
Detective Bell contacted investigators in Montgomery County.
All right, you need anything else, let me know.
It was likely they were looking for the same killer. And likely he would strike again.
It appeared that the same type of tie wraps had been used in that murder also. Prior to Miss Van Huss being murdered, we had not had any cases even remotely similar to that. And then for a second homicide to occur 10 days later in close proximity, we felt that we had a predator out there and that he was probably going to continue to murder victims until we caught him.
A fax came in from Republic Money Orders. Investigators knew they had a major break.
They had discovered that the larger money order had been cashed, and they had sent me a photocopy of the cashed money order front and back, showing a purchaser's name, and the back had been endorsed by another person.
The $400 money order had been cashed at Ice House, a local bar, and the signature was revealing.
The front of the money order showed that the money order had been purchased by a Roy Landry, with an address in South Houston.
There was a second signature on the back of the money order, but only the first name, Bill, was legible.
We conducted a computer check on Mr. Landry, located a rather extensive criminal history on him, and immediately determined that he was a potential suspect in our case based on his past criminal history.
Detective Bell finally had a suspect. Now he needed to find him.
We located a mugshot photo of Roy Landry, placed it in a photo spread, and my partner and I drove out there to the Ice House.
Wine, if you can believe that. Because this is all you got, I'm going to go.
The Ice House was a no-frills beer and whiskey hangout where patrons minded their own business. Investigators went there in the hopes of finding more information about the money order.
Harris County Sheriff's Office. Can you take a job? We're going to go ahead and show
They
you.
presented the photo lineup with Roy Landry's picture.
You sure? You don't recognize it?
The owners didn't recognize anyone, and they had never heard of Roy Landry.
Positive? Okay, how about the back?
Detectives showed them the other signature with the first name Bill.
Bill Kutzner.
This they recognized right away. It was Bill Kutzner. They had another check from Kutzner, one that bounced. The signatures were nearly identical.
They immediately recognized the name as Bill Kutzner, and he's the person that is their refrigeration and air conditioning man out there.
Bill left us something bad.
Detectives needed to speak with both Kutzner and Landry.
So
They reached Roy Landry first.
we were able to make contact with Mr. Landry. He came down here to the Homicide Division to provide us with some limited information regarding Mr. Kutzner and where we might be able to locate him. For the purchaser is Roy Landry.
They discovered he had a lengthy criminal record, and when they caught up to Landry, he was reluctant to give them any information.
You can either be a witness or you can be a defendant. What's it going to be?
All right, I'm not going to take the rap.
Landry gave in to detectives and gave up information on Kutzner's whereabouts.
About doing a robbery or something?
Yeah, he said something about doing a robbery. Said it was an easy pick because the lady was by herself. I asked him why he didn't need to do it himself, and he said he lived too close.
You know where that stuff is now?
Yeah, it's at that house.
Investigators drove to Bill Kutzner's house.
Most of the windows didn't have curtains on them. There seemed to be very little furniture in the house, and it almost appeared that the house had been abandoned.
Kutzner was nowhere to be found. But then, Detective Bell made a startling discovery.
When I was walking back to our car, I stopped right and noticed laying in the driveway, almost embedded in the gravel, was one of the large white tie wraps that had been used in both of the homicides.
Detective Bell knew the tie wrap was circumstantial evidence, insufficient to make an arrest. Each clue brought them closer to catching the killer, but detectives needed to hurry if they were to stop him before he struck a third time.
Yep.
Investigators were closing in on the killer who was terrorizing a community. 2 women were dead, and detectives were working round the clock to catch him before he killed again. Detective Ben Bell did a background check on their prime suspect. His full name was Richard William Kutzner, and he had a history of arrests.
None of the neighbors,
Detective Bell interviewed Kutzner's ex-wife.
There's been hardly any communication at all.
She said she hadn't spoken with him in weeks, and she had no idea where he might be. But then, she recalled a key incident.
The truck was, and they took that, and that was really the last of anything we had left.
Kutzner had fallen behind in the payments on his truck.
What do you want?
And a few weeks earlier, a repo man showed up to take possession of it.
I can get the people, man. I don't have nothing to do, man. I just...
Kutzner was furious, but there was nothing he could do as he watched his truck being taken. His ex-wife remembered he didn't even have a chance to remove his gear from the back of the truck.
He was very violent.
She recalled the name of the auto company that took possession of the vehicle.
Drunk. I could smell alcohol on him. You know, that's an old story. That's never going to change. It was A&W Motors, if I'm not mistaken.
Investigators went to the car lot and spoke with the manager. He remembered Kutzner's red truck coming in.
He had told us that when the truck was repossessed, all of Kutzner's personal papers, air conditioning equipment, tools, all of his belongings were still in the truck. That Kutzner had contacted him, said that he was going to come by and pick the stuff up, and then when he never showed up, they removed all of Kutzner's belongings from the truck, boxed them up, and locked them in one of their sheds for safekeeping.
Investigators looked at Kutzner's possessions, careful not to touch anything. Wanting a closer look, they chose to obtain a warrant.
We could see that several of the ties similar to what had been used in our case and the Montgomery County case were clearly visible in the box. Since we were dealing with the possibility of 2 capital murder cases here, we decided to err on the side of caution and went ahead and obtained a search warrant before we went through the box and all of Kutzner's belongings.
A few hours later, investigators returned with a warrant. They discovered a mound of evidence.
Once we got the box, we found that there were tie wraps that matched the Harris County case. There were tie wraps that matched the Montgomery County case along with red wire.
They also found a $10 money order, as well as a tenant information form on Unit 308. It matched the contract found on Cowan's desk.
Rental information form with the unit number on it.
Investigators also retrieved a pair of diagonal wire cutters. Examiners at the crime lab had already established the killer had used a cutting tool, such as wire cutters, at the crime scenes. Forensic examiners compared the red wire from the suspect's belongings to the wire used to bind Janice Vogel's feet.
Ultimately, what you want to try to find in the end is the same pattern of striations on your evidence item that you made on your known items.
A high-powered magnifying glass would be used to enhance the wire patterns.
And if you have a sufficient quantity of these striations, then I can render an opinion that no other tool could have made that mark.
Based on all of the evidence that we were able to recover from the used car lot, we were able to obtain an arrest warrant for Bill Kutzner for capital murder for the case in Harris County.
One-time suspect Roy Landry had told investigators where Kutzner was staying. Harris County officers decided to close in late at night, when Kutzner would likely be at the residence and bystanders would be minimal. Detectives entered the residence and found Bill Kutzner sleeping on the couch.
Detective Bell, roll your stuff. Now, roll your stuff.
What do you want?
You're under arrest. No,
All I told you about was some money orders, Bell.
He was arrested without incident, and he denied any involvement in the murders.
I said you're under arrest.
Well, that's all I know about is the money orders. What else do you want?
You're talking about that.
With the suspect in custody, investigators continued to strengthen the case against William Richard Kutzner. Latent print examiner Gail Mills compared Kutzner's fingerprints against a single latent print developed at the crime scene. The print was found on the partially executed rental agreement.
It was photographed, and I then compared it to the prints of Richard Kutzner, the suspect in this case. And I did identify Richard Kutzner's thumbprint as being on the document.
The fingerprint match verified Kutzner had been in the mini storage office, but it did not prove he had committed the murder. Police believed Kutzner's gear from his storage locker would seal their case. Toolmark examiner Matthew Clements knew the ties had been cut by wire cutters, and now he had the tool to match with the markings.
The process that you would use to compare wire cutters to evidence recovered from a crime scene would be to make your test cuts in a similar medium that's not going to damage the tool itself.
After making the test cuts, Clements used a comparison microscope to do a side-by-side analysis of scratches, or striations, found on both the evidence and the test cuts. In the case of Bill Kutzner, examiners found exactly what police hoped: a perfect match.
The forensic evidence that we were able to obtain, the fingerprint, the tool marks on the wire, and the tie wrap, showed that Bill Kutzner was the person that committed both of these murders, and only Bill Kutzner. And Bill Kutzner got what he deserved when he was sentenced to death.
He was executed on August 7th, 2002. Bill Kutzner purposely avoided high-profile locations to commit his crimes. But for some killers, heavily traveled roadways are no deterrents for murder. Foley, Alabama is a small town of 150,000. The crime rate is low and murder is rare. December 4th, 1997. Boldly in broad daylight, a robbery is taking place along a highway. A customer just finished filling his car with gas. He went inside to pay. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw next. He called 911.
911, what is your emergency?
ambulance arrived in minutes. But it was too late. The victim's driver's license was found. She was 43-year-old Nancy Biddle, the owner of the store. Lieutenant Richard Springsteen of the Foley Police Department responded.
It seemed that there was a struggle, and there was what appeared to be defensive wounds on the hands of the victim. There was some blood stains collected, fingerprints collected, multiple pictures of the crime scene, and of course the body of the victim was taken to the forensic sciences laboratories.
Investigators noticed the knives on the sandwich counter appeared to have been handled. They were collected as evidence. The victim was autopsied by Dr. James Downs at the Alabama Department of Forensic Science. He analyzed her brutal murder.
She had at least 35 different stab and cutting injuries to her face, her chest, her extremities. Nancy struggled to survive. She fought her killer ferociously, as indicated by the dislocated finger and the multiple defensive injuries. When I look at a knife wound on a body, what I'm trying to do is get a sense of the measurements. How far does a knife go into the body? And there's some room for interpretation. For instance, in a stab wound to the chest, the depth of penetration of a stab wound is different depending on whether or not one is inhaling, expanding their chest, or exhaling.
Dr. Downs noted the width and depth of each wound, as well as cuts left on the victim's bones. Downs compared the stab wounds to each of the knives collected at the scene.
In Nancy's autopsy, it was easy to determine that the stab wounds had actually penetrated into the body up to approximately 4.5 inches. That actually penetrated through bone, through rib, and through the breastbone. You look at the injuries for the type of weapon that might be used, and I measure each and every one of those 35 stab wounds. I measure how long the wound is on the body, how deep it penetrates into the body. That penetration gives you an idea of how long the blade is. And looking at the suspect knives that were brought in for me to compare against the wounds on the body, it was fairly easy to rule those out because the blade lengths weren't right, they weren't the proper thickness or the proper width. So none of those fit the wounds that were present on her body.
I didn't notice anyone inside. Came back out, and Maverick was still there.
The police located a witness, perhaps the last person besides the killer who saw Nancy Biddle alive. The witness bought gas that morning. He recalled as he returned to his car, he noticed a green Ford Maverick parked at the store. He hadn't seen the driver, but his description of the car gave police their first lead. Although the Maverick has not been manufactured since 1977, a search of motor vehicle records indicated a surprisingly large number of green Mavericks in the area. Police tracked down every green Maverick registered within a 60-mile radius of the crime scene.
5 Adam 628, correction, 5 Adam 6208 D. David, County Road 71 north of 64.
Drivers were interviewed and their identifications checked.
Good afternoon. See your license, please.
But after several days, no significant leads were developed. The investigation had stalled.
We're looking for a vehicle that matches this description. Obviously, you're not him. Thank you.
And although detectives believed the car would lead them to a killer, the trail of green Mavericks had led police to a dead end.
911, what is your emergency? I'm sorry, you said there was a woman down? What's your address there?
10 days after the brutal killing of convenience store owner Nancy Biddle, 911 dispatchers received another distressing call.
911 transfer for a woman down.
At the Diamond gas station, a second woman, cashier Linda Weber, was found stabbed to death in a back room. The similarities between the crimes were disturbing. The service station was along the same highway as Biddle's gas station. And although the store had a video surveillance camera, the video recorder was torn from the rack, leaving behind no account of the crime. Examiners lifted fingerprints from the area where the VCR was taken, but results would be inconclusive. For Lieutenant Warren Stewart of the Alabama Department of Investigations, the similarities to Nancy Biddle's murder could not be ignored.
Well, both scenes, it appeared to be a robbery and a struggle. We really didn't know what we were dealing with, if we were dealing with just someone needing money or if we had a serial killer possibly within the Foley area.
Once again, the victim's body would be examined at the Alabama Department of Forensic Science. As in the first case, Dr. James Downs measured Linda Weber's stab wounds and checked for bone lacerations.
In the case of Linda, we didn't have a bone defect to compare to the suspect knife, but we did have the physical measurements of the wounds in the body, which were identical to those in Nancy's body.
Dr. Downs concluded that both Nancy Biddle and Linda Weber had been stabbed with the same weapon. With the community and local businesses gripped in fear, Bowen County Sheriff's Department formed a task force. It consisted of the county's most seasoned investigators. They structured a plan to catch the killer.
This is the area near the Diamond Mart, and Diamond Mart's here in the parking lot, and this wood line here that's behind the area.
The investigators pored over photographs and details from each of the murders.
This is the area.
They had to act fast to restore peace to the community.
Highway 59 is here.
Detective Huey Mack of the Bowen County Police Department led the task force investigation.
The predominant emotion at the time by the public was fear. It is a low crime area. Homicides are rare, but when you have two homicides within just a few days that are believed to have been committed by the same individual, fear was starting to run rampant.
With limited evidence, the task force would need the public's help. They blanketed the local media with information, set up a hotline and requests for tips. It began to pay off. A witness came forward as the police re-canvassed the area around the second murder scene. Detective Mack believed it might be a solid lead.
After the second homicide, we had an individual who described a black male coming from the wood line within minutes of the crime being reported. Our witness literally heard the sirens responding to the gas station when she saw this individual run from the wood line.
She thought she recognized the man from her neighborhood. His name was Kelvin Stallworth. Detectives immediately searched the area behind the store. Amidst the leaves, they found a VCR they believed to be the same as the one taken from the store. Hoping to find a tape, detectives were disappointed to find the machine empty. The tape had been wrenched from the machine. The woods were dense, but police scoured the large area in search of the tape. They found nothing.
We believe the tape not only contained the image of the suspect, but based upon the images that the particular cameras in this store would have captured, more than likely filmed the entire murder.
Investigators immediately followed up on the witness's tip. They performed a background check on Stallworth. He had an extensive criminal record and an outstanding warrant. Investigators had a suspect. Now they had to find him. Police distributed his mugshot to the media, hoping someone would know his whereabouts.
We disseminated to the media time and date and location information, and asking them to please contact the public if anyone had any information to call a 24-hour number, which was set up for this, so that people could respond. This lady took on her own initiative to call and let us know.
After seeing his picture on the news, a manager at the city electric company contacted police.
But earlier today, about an hour after the murders.
The manager remembered seeing the suspect at the electric company. She said the man came in to pay an overdue electric bill. She recalled he pulled out a large roll of money and paid his bill in cash. Hearing police sirens outside, the man grew agitated and nervous. Then he left.
What did he look like? Maybe about his early 20s.
Investigators obtained the billing address from the electric company.
She did tell me.
The address belonged to Stallworth's girlfriend. They presented her with a warrant. As they entered the house, they caught Stallworth in a back room, trying to escape. Knowing he may be armed and dangerous, the officers drew their weapons and ordered him to surrender.
Stop right there.
They handcuffed the suspect and began searching the house. All the while, Stallworth professed his innocence.
No weapons in here at all?
In the back bedroom, police found incriminating evidence.
Detective, I found something.
A knife beneath the mattress.
This jacket here, is this yours?
And blood-stained clothing.
You tell me that stain is on the sleeve there?
Calvin Stallworth waived his rights and began to talk to the police. He said he had nothing to hide. Stallworth insisted he had nothing to do with the murders and claimed he had never been at the stores. Detectives then told him an eyewitness placed him at one of the crime scenes.
If you would explain to me the morning.
Stallworth quickly changed his story.
I got scared and I saw the money laying on the counter and I needed the money, so I just...
Lieutenant Stewart questioned the suspect and couldn't believe what he heard.
When he walks in the store and she's laying behind the counter and notices that she's been stabbed, at this point he says he gets scared and he sees money up on the counter and on the floor, and he said he knew he needed money to pay his bills, so he just took the opportunity that was presented to him.
I just, I saw the cameras and...
Hello? Hello? Anybody here?
Second homicide, he puts himself going into the station. He says as he walks in, he hears a noise.
Ma'am.
He looks up and observes a VCR and camera in the back room. At this point, he gets scared. He's afraid he's on video and that if he don't take that VCR, he's going to be accused of the homicide. So he basically goes up, grabs the VCR, and leaves the scene of the second homicide. His stories were totally unbelievable. Calvin placed himself at the scene of both ladies as they died.
Despite his detailed account, detectives were building their own theory of the crimes.
How was she laid?
And it didn't jive with Calvin's.
Laying flat.
Forensic scientists would bring together all the pieces, confirming that Calvin Stallworth was indeed their man. Detectives were convinced Calvin Stallworth murdered 2 Alabama store workers despite his proclamation of innocence. They knew he was lying. Stallworth's sweatshirt was processed for blood evidence. William Jones of the Alabama Department of Forensic Science explains.
We swab the stain to see if we can get a color change for a positive presumptive test for blood. Once we do that, we do further testing to see if there was human DNA present in the stain.
The blood was found to have the same DNA markers as the blood of Linda Weber. But because Stallworth admitted to being at the crime scene, the evidence was inconclusive. Now, Dr. Downs would scrutinize the knife found under Stallworth's mattress.
Thick, single sharp edge.
He measured and recorded all its dimensions. The knife was consistent with the size and depth of the wounds to both Nancy Biddle and Linda Weber.
And the measurements are consistent with those in the wound.
Dr. Downs then compared the edge of the blade to the cut marks on the bones of both women. This, too, was a match.
I was able to take that knife and measure it, the length of the blade, the width of the blade, the thickness of the blade, and compare that to the piece of bone that I had retained from my original autopsy. And I was able to take the piece of bone and the knife and literally, like a hand would fit into a glove, and to show that this knife had the exact same physical dimensions as the wound in the bone.
The Alabama State Appeals Court has sent the case back to a Baldwin County Circuit judge.
Although Stallworth's unbelievable story placing himself at the crime scene may have been enough evidence to sway a jury, investigators were quick to point out this case relied heavily on science to ensure a guilty verdict.
Without forensics, we probably would not have obtained a conviction in this case. Forensic is what linked Calvin Stallworth to both scenes.
Once again, science prevailed, bringing Calvin Stallworth to justice. He was tried and convicted of 2 counts of capital murder. He was sentenced to death for his crimes.
I think I must have left.
Most killers try desperately to cover their tracks. But there are times the very act of their violence creates a signature that cannot be erased. Forensic science can reveal that signature, and with it, a killer who's left his victims marked for death.